Aloha and welcome to season two, episode two, arbitrarily determined the seasons, that is, of Figments, the Power of Imagination. This show is intended to entertain you and inspire you, and it might do that, probably will do both today. I am making a big sacrifice to to conduct this show right now because my Milwaukee Brewers, that's the shirt, are playing the Chicago Cubs starting in 10 minutes in a pivotal series between the Central Division leading Brewers and I can't give the full name of the Cubs without violating some FCC standard. But it's worth it because today I'm going to have a good friend from boyhood days who's become a better friend thanks to the connections of the internet. And he's going to tell you about his Figment. The reason I wanted to have Dick on, let me first talk about Figments, because if you're a new viewer, or if you haven't watched for a while, Figments are kind of fanciful notions that enter your mind, and they have a bit of a bad reputation as being just that, fantasies. They're the root of all great innovations, accomplishments, ideas that make a difference. When the dreamer dreams enough and has enough determination, perseverance, and good luck to make his dream reality. So I'm a car guy. You may not know that unless I said it in a previous episode and you watched the episode, but I'm a car guy. I've got a slightly modified Mustang that you can see here. Um, nice. I like that car a lot. In Hawaii, it just means I can merge like a big dog because there's no real place to let the big dog eat. So I fancy myself a car guy, but through Facebook and other means, I've reconnected with a friend from my days in Shawano, Wisconsin, not spelled like it sounds, named Dick Karth. And I'm happy to have him here as a guest and talk about how he said to his wife, Kathy, honey, I bought a race car. Aloha, Dick, and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Glad to be with you.
It's a great story, but you're not such a fanciful guy, and we'll get to that in a bit. You're pretty serious about this. Now we both grew up near a half-mile clay oval in Shawano, Wisconsin, at the fairgrounds. We don't think this is the actual track, but we both watched cars like this race around that oval, and I remember it vividly. I'm sure you do.
Yeah, I was as a kid went to the races just about every weekend
Yep.
on Saturday night. And my first recollection ever of going to a motorsports event was my family owned a funeral home, and back in the 50s and 60s, funeral homes typically in small communities provided ambulance service. So it was our funeral home's turn to provide ambulance service for the fairgrounds during the fair, and they had midgets racing. And this was in the days of if people know anything about motorsports. Midgets were very small cars, four-cylinder engines. I remember my dad talking to one of the owners, and the guy said he had about 90 horsepower in it. But
Really?
looking back, those cars didn't have a lot of protection. The drivers went into the corners and had to pump a hand fuel pump to be able to keep the fuel pressure up. And I thought that was just the coolest thing I'd ever seen. And then after I got older, to the point where I could be out alone on a Saturday night, then my parents allowed my brother and I and the neighbor guy up the street, probably a friend of yours, Jim Spiegel, to
Oh,
go to the
yeah.
stock car races on Saturday night because his dad was in the VFW and worked the beer stand. So we had to ride out to the track and back. So I just about went there we rarely missed a race.
I remember it well. I remember the days that my parents, for whatever reason, probably bad behavior, didn't let me go to the races, and we were close enough on Fairview Way to hear it. It drove me crazy to hear the cars racing around the track and not be able to see it. Dick, another memory I have is on that clay track, the clumps of clay coming off the wheels as they went into the corner. It was awesome.
It really was, and going back, and I've learned this since then through some of the people that I've met through racing. But the guys that raced in the 50s and 60s, there were no places to buy parts. They bought everything came out of the junkyard.
I
Um,
bet.
Exhaust pipes oftentimes were drive shafts, and the cars were pretty rude and crude to drive. But at the same time, a lot of them honed their skills. And some of those guys that you and I watched at the Shawano Fairgrounds went on to race in USAC and the USAC Stock Car Series.
Yeah, and they were, as you said, pretty crude cars, but to me they were just awesome machines. And I'm a dinosaur who loves the sound of a reciprocating engine, and man, it was beautiful. So tell us a little, if you would, about your family and your upbringing and what led you to your eventual life in racing.
Well, our family was my mom and dad and brother and sister. And as we were growing up, um, I was not much of an athlete. I wasn't into sports. We went up to Circle Drive once in a while, and I tried to play baseball, and that didn't work out well.
Ditto.
And then we started skiing. There was a ski hill built west of Shawano on Elder Kunschke's Hill. They used a
Hmm.
tractor to create a rope tow to pull us up the hill, and I seemed to enjoy that, and got to where I could get down the hill without having too much excitement. And I recall vividly going with the Shawano High School Ski Club, which was actually an outlaw club. The school would not sanction it for liability
Uh,
reasons. And we went up to Powderhorn, and I think your family had a place up there.
we
And
did.
I remember you as being one of the hot shot skiers. Uh, your name was on a list of guys that had done real well on the slalom and whatever else they had there. So
Well, I was voted most likely to be exciting, but not very good. So yeah, don't oversell that. But our family did ski, and just to talk about our upbringing in Shawano, and our families were both living pretty well at the time, but our the place we had, the first one I remember was in Cable, or in, I'll think of the name of the place outside of Hurley. And all nine of us slept in a one-room house. So don't think of a luxury chalet, viewers. It wasn't. So anyway, so you're living life, and professionally, you went to school and got into financial management. I'm going to kind of summarize it. And Dick, after we spoke about 3 weeks ago, getting ready for this show, and I reflected on what you'd shared about your journey in racing, it really occurred to me that you're a very methodical guy, and you've taken the same approach to this journey to having your own race car. Is that a fair description?
I think it is. I spent my career, almost all of it, in the mortgage business. The last few years I spent with an operational risk for M&I Bank and BMO Harris from Toronto. And
Hmm.
I learned that in being successful in business, you can't take giant, huge leaps at one time. Things come along methodically. That was not my plan in racing when I bought the race car. Um, I had we started going to the Indianapolis 500 in 1968.
Yeah, and I know that race, and we'd hoped to have you on the Monday after, but schedule didn't work. But that race is special to you, right?
Yep, we a Chevy dealer in Shawano, Bert Anderson, who's
Yep.
originally from Chicago, was very close to the Bentonhausen family. And he told my dad, he said, you need to go and take your sons to the Indy 500. It's an experience they will never forget. So my parents bought tickets when they were driving back from Florida. When they drove through Indianapolis, went to the ticket office, bought 3 tickets. We went to the race in 68. And that was really something. My dad
I
renewed
bet.
tickets, and we started going every year thereafter. And I think I had to miss the race twice due to weddings in the family, and twice it was rained out on race day, and I wasn't able to stay for one day. It got delayed to Wednesday. Another year it got delayed to the following weekend, and work wouldn't allow me to go there. But I've been to a lot of races there, and we continue to go back every year since then.
I'm going to guess that just doing simple fighter pilot math, that means you may have been to the Indy 500 50 times, right?
I think I've been there 50 times. I know that uh,
Wow.
I've been in my seat at the start time more than 50 times. Twice it was pouring rain. But we
Wow.
sat in the upper deck underneath a canopy, so we were dry.
Oh, that's cool. So, eventually, having been around racing, and there's a lot I'd love to talk about that we probably won't have time. We'll see, like your flying experience, because we share that passion as well. But eventually, at age what, you bought a race car?
52, 5'2".
Wow, 5'2", got it. And I took poetic license on the tagline for this, and said the tagline was "Honey, I bought a race car," but it really isn't that. Your wife Kathy knew that you were thinking about it, and you mentioned as we did the lead into the show that you really want to mention the folks who've been supportive to you in your racing pursuit, and clearly she's right there at the top of the list.
Yep. Without her, I would never have been able to do it. We were living in New York City from 2002 to 2005 and commuting to Bristol, Tennessee for the NASCAR races.
Mm-hmm.
And I had been to Road America for a vintage event, and I saw vintage Indy cars and I saw vintage stock cars. And I actually went to a vintage Indy car dealer in St. Louis to look at some cars that were for sale.
Who knew
Fortunately,
there was? Who even knew there was a
I
vintage
know, isn't
IndyCar
that
dealer?
something? And unfortunately, he talked me out of an Indy car. And
Ah,
so my friend Dick Trickle from Wisconsin Rapids had driven a car for Junie Donlevy of Richmond, Virginia. And coming back, I knew that we were going to be real close to Richmond. So I called Junie's shop, talked to him, said I wanted to buy one of Dick's old cars. And he said, "Well, stop by." So on Monday after the race, we stopped by. And to make a long story short, that was in August. And in February, he called me and he said, "I got a car for you. Come look at it." We drove down from New York, looked at it. I agreed to buy it, got my job in Milwaukee with M&I, and took
mhm.
delivery of the car in August.
Hey, Dick, let me interrupt to just say Dick Trickles was a friend of yours. Um, and he's somebody I know that you think a lot of and work for his memorial project. Legendary racer, over 1,200 victories. Didn't do as well at the highest levels of NASCAR for some, but a legendary racer. How did you get to know Dick Trickle? How did that happen?
I lived in La Crosse for 23 years, and I
Hmm.
worked for a real
La
estate
Crosse, Wisconsin, on the west side of Wisconsin for
on the
those of us here in Hawaii.
Homa Train Company. And I was working for a real estate company, and we were doing business with a real estate developer in La Crosse by the name of Charlie Raymond. And we were at a meeting at the end of May, and my boss wanted to have another meeting on the last Friday of May. And I said, "I'm not going to be here. I'm taking off that day." And Charlie looked at me and he said, "I'm not going to be here either that day." And he said, "Are you going south?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "So am I." So we realized that both of us were race fans. He was a big, longtime friend of Trickles and a big supporter.
Ah,
He introduced me to Dick, and I started following him then. And through Dick, I went to a lot of NASCAR races and spent some time with him. And I decided if I'm going to have an old stock car, I want one of his.
an old stock car. Something you mentioned as we were getting ready for this is that you've never bought yourself a new car. True?
That is correct.
But you did buy this car,
I
this
bought
race car, the one behind you, and we've got another uh, graphic without your face in front. That is your car.
That's actually the NASCAR Xfinity car. I drove at Road America 2 years.
Ah,
The Trickle car was the Heilig Myers car, as you can see.
yeah. Feel free to give a plug. We don't
Yep,
get, there's no
they're not
money in this on Think Tech, folks.
business
So,
anymore, but they're nice people. I bought the car from Junie. He outfitted it for me and connected me to Joe Ryan in Gary, Indiana, who put the engine in it. And the car was all put together by Ken Bell. Junie's shop foreman, and I picked it up, hauled it back to Wisconsin, and then went to driver's school.
Okay, let's stop there for just a minute. Let me put a plug in and take a quick commercial break, if you will, and tell you that we are brought to you by Think Tech Hawaii, a nonprofit corporation that can use your support. You can go to their website, thinktechhawaii, all one word.com. Don't put the all one word in there, and make a donation if you would. They bring you both this show, The Power of Imagination, and my commentary show, Figments on Reality. Now, there won't be a Figments on Reality. That's the reality of the holiday weekend next week. But we'll be back in a few weeks and see you then in Figments on Reality. So, Dick, when you bought this car, did you buy it to have in the garage and say, I've got the coolest garage ever? Or did you really intend to race it? You indicated you went to driving school, so you at least intended to drive it.
Right. I made arrangements to buy the car. My plan was to run it in vintage events up at Road America near Elkhart Lake, Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
And during the time that the car was being finished out for me by Don Levy's shop,
Adding small things like an engine, right? Because it didn't come with an engine.
I was connected to a guy by the name of Chuck King from West Chicago. And Chuck has worked for various USAC stock car teams and NASCAR teams. And he said what I should do is go to the driver's school that Midwestern Council of Sports Car Clubs is going to have in early September. So I checked that out and decided, yeah, that's probably a good idea. Um, I was so naive when I bought the cars. I bought it with one set of tires.
Probably not enough.
Not enough. Chuck said, "Well, how many sets of tires? That's four. Did you get with the car?" I said, "Well, it's on four tires."
Yeah.
And he
What do
said,
you
"Well,
need?
you probably need more than that." So I went off to driver's school and didn't know what I was doing. The comp director for Midwestern Council um, uh, criticized me for bringing a 3,400 pound, 750 horsepower car to come through driver's school with, because it was by far the biggest car they'd ever had in driver's school. And
Sorry, it's my car.
yeah, one interesting experience I had in driver's school is we start out and we play follow the leader, and we did that for a couple of laps with the yellow flag out at each flag stand on the corners, and then they drop the yellow flag, and now you can start to pass. So okay, I'm going to go a little bit faster. And after a lap or two of that, I came out of the last turn to go down to the front straightaway, and I thought to myself, now's my opportunity to see what I paid all this money for and what I've been waiting for. So in second gear coming out of turn 7 at Black Hawk Farms, I put the hammer down and the car took off and is like, holy smokes, this is like from a Cessna 150 to 900 horsepower and a Beach 18 on floats. I mean, it took off. And I go rocketing into the first corner, hammered the brakes, and the next thing I know, the car is galloping like it's going over
Oh,
uh,
yeah.
uh, 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 culverts, and I couldn't figure out what that was. Went through the next corner, everything's fine. Checkered flag came out. I pulled into the paddock, parked next to my trailer. Chuck comes over, and he said, "Somebody's looking for you." And I got out of the car, and here's two of the safety workers, and each of them had a 42-pound piece of lead. And they said, "We found these two in the grass, and the other one is out in the pucker brush somewhere, and we'll get it at lunchtime." And what had happened was the lead in one of the frame rails hadn't been properly fastened in. And when I hit
Welded. Yeah.
it came flying out, went out in front of the car, and then I drove over all three pieces of the lead.
Nice. So why do they call it pucker brush? I think I know, but why do they call it pucker brush?
Being a pilot, I think you and I understand.
Yeah. It's a tightening of a certain part of your body as things get bad and you get what's called a pucker factor.
Yeah, when you get out there, you're in an area you don't belong.
So that's a great segue to what's your, if not that, what's your scariest moment? I have a picture of the car um, driving on the grass, which I don't think was intended.
No,
What's your scariest moment in your car or any other race car?
I think probably the one you're looking at there.
Really?
That's an ARCA stock car that some friends of mine put together with me, and we ran it at Road America in 2017. And I qualified, I think, 23rd out of 38 cars.
Not bad.
This is my first professional race, my first ARCA race, and I'm first lap going into turn 12, Canada corner at Road America, and I think somebody touched me from behind. There were no marks on the car, but all of a sudden I'm turned around, I'm looking at the inside of the fence, and I'm waiting for somebody to hit me in the passenger side because I've got at this
Ooh.
point probably 12 or 13 cars to come around me. They all made it around me. I was able to get going again and continue, but even though I've run 160, 65 at Road America, I've done probably 177 at Indianapolis Motor Speedway in a vintage event. I did a test at Daytona in an ARCA car and probably got up to 182, 185. Um, the car is always under control, but in this case,
Mhm.
um, I didn't know what was going to happen. And of course, it's a steel body car, and when they hit it, it takes days to repair it. And that's the last thing I wanted to have happen was a
Yeah,
major.
probably would have taken days to repair you too. I know they've got their safety cages, but I would have been thinking about that. And I share that sense of um, being in an airplane and a jet, whatever, where as long as you're under control, even the risky things don't feel, I wouldn't say not risky, but if you get a vote, you feel like you've got it under control. When you don't have a vote, say the airplane is departed control flight, and I've experienced that, that's a bad feeling. I'm not up to being a passenger in a fighter, and I'm sure you're not up to being a passenger in your race car.
That's right. That's right.
So time is flying. Let's talk a little bit more about your mentor, Dick Trickle. As I said, he was a short track legend with over 1,200 victories. What did you learn from him and about him that drew you to him?
Uh, I I knew the name Dick Trickle when I first was introduced to him by Charlie Raymond.
Hmm.
I knew he was successful.
Yeah.
When I would read the Milwaukee Sentinel on Monday mornings after a USAC race at State Fair Park, Dick's name was always close to the top. But only after I met him and interacted with him and Charlie told me the Dick Trickle story did I realize here's a guy racing short tracks. They raced uh, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And some Sundays they had a race in the afternoon and in the evening, and they had specials on Tuesdays. He All he did was this short track racing that for a lot of guys was a hobby, but he made a
Hmm.
living at it. He had two or three employees at the time. He had two trucks to haul three or four race cars around. He had a dedicated race shop, and he truly made a living and owned a home and raised a family through through relatively small time motorsports. Once
And
he
that was the outlier at the time. I can remember guys showing up at the Shawano track with their beat up pickup pulling a trailer, and it was, as you said, just a hobby. I'm sorry I interrupted.
Yep, and it was what I call the golden days of short track racing, where
Hmm.
they could race on a budget with a modest sponsor, and the purses were big enough that they could do well. I mean, Dick won consistently. Once he
Yeah,
became a winner,
very
and,
consistent.
and he was a very personable guy. He ascribed to what I call the Richard Petty school of being a race car driver. You don't leave the track until you've signed the last autograph in the evening. It doesn't make any difference how late it is. If there's still people waiting in line for your autograph, you talk to them, get your picture taken, and you sign whatever they put in front of you. And that's the way Dick was. He was in demand by a lot of tracks all over the country because he had a good following. You know, they talk about professional football teams and college teams traveling well. The Trickle fans traveled well and traveled extensively to watch him race.
Yeah, and you know, he got his success after I joined the Air Force and left Wisconsin for travels around the world, but I still knew how well he was doing.
Yeah, and his story gets to be so interesting when he got a call at age 49 to fill in for an injured driver at Rockingham, North Carolina. That really started his NASCAR career. He was the NASCAR Rookie of the Year at age 49. And I mean, that was the most bizarre thing that ever happened.
So, folks, I recommend you Google or whatever your search engine of preference is, Dick Trickle. It's an amazing story, sad ending. And Dick, I know that you still support the memorial project and keep his memory alive, and I'm grateful for that. I'm not so grateful that this has gone by so quickly. There's a lot more I'd love to talk about, including your flying, because you've done extensive flying in float planes and other stuff that I haven't flown. But before we go, I do need to ask you, what's your current Figment? So you lived the dream and bought your car, and I know there are many more stories to share on that, but what's your current dream, your Figment?
As far as racing goes, I want to run Bonneville. I'd like to run.
Oh, wow. Bonneville salt track where speed records are set, folks.
I want to run my Heilig Myers car over 200 miles an hour. And probably the most difficult thing would be for me to do would be I'd like to run the Pikes Peak hill climb.
Awesome. Yeah, the hill climb, I've watched that on various shows, and I'm not going to Bonneville because I'm smarter than that for my own skill level, and probably not going to do the hill climb. We usually close with what would Fig do. Here's what Fig would do. Fig would not get in his Mustang and think that he's Dick Karth. Okay, I'll remember that I'm just Dan Leaf on the streets of Oahu and try to keep things reasonable. Dick, an amazing story. I wish we had more time. Maybe we'll come back again sometime. Thanks so much for sharing your Figment and how you made it reality, and for making the time to talk with us.
Well, thanks for the opportunity. I really appreciate this. Keep up the good work.
Oh, thanks. My pleasure. So that's it. In the can already. Another edition of Figments, The Power of Imagination, Season 2, Episode 2. No Figments on Reality next week. The following week, in the next Figments, The Power of Imagination, I'm going to try to talk my friend Ross Rowley into coming back and talking baseball. If he doesn't, I will, because I'm a fan. And it'll be just the day before the All-Star game. So hopefully Ross and I will give our assessment of the season thus far, and our Figment will be that we're MLB Network commentators, which we're not. So thanks again for viewing. Thanks to Think Tech Hawaii for hosting, and aloha.